I enjoy meeting my BVTV guests from around the world, direct here from our studio in Northern England. There's a purpose behind the interviews, and that's to bring you great insights, innovation, and inspiration from global thinkers. But today's a bit unusual for me because I'm taking you to Los Angeles to meet a Brit. She's certainly made an impact there on the innovation scene. She's an entrepreneur and author of the book, Los Angeles Reinvented. Are you curious? Well, then let's meet the founder of FORE MEDIA, Jodie Hopperton. Welcome, Jodie.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Say morning to you. The end of the day for us. You know, we've done our work here. You know,
about time for a glass of wine for you.
Yeah,
I'm having my caffeine.
How did you know? How did you know? Now, Jodie, I'm intrigued. What's a high-flying Brit like you doing in Los Angeles, and why the name FORE MEDIA?
Indeed. Well, do you know what? There's actually a lot of Brits here in Los Angeles. Partly, the Brits love America because it's the only country that still loves a British accent. I'm just teasing. So I've lived in a bunch of different places. I'm from London, as you can probably tell from the accent, but I've lived in Paris, I've lived in Madrid, I've spent a lot of time in New York when I was working for the New York Times. And an opportunity came up to move to Los Angeles, and it was actually really more intriguing because LA just hadn't really come across my path. I visited more than 70 countries. I spent a lot of time traveling. And as I started looking at it, I was more and more intrigued by the city. And I spoke to a couple of friends, one of which comes here pretty frequently on business. And her instinct just said, Jodie, if you get the opportunity, move there. It's fantastic. So I decided to take the risk. My philosophy generally is put yourself out there. If it feels good, do it. Look at the worst case scenario, and that would have been just move back. So I came out here. I ended up setting up FORE MEDIA because of all the innovation, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. And the reason I called this FORE is, as you know, you're not too far from Scotland, but FORE is actually originally Scottish, and it's to warn anyone about the flight of a golf ball coming in their direction. And that's very much what we do. We help people with their peripheral vision. What are the things that are coming at you? What are the things that are going to change your business, your industry that you might not see? What are the innovations that are being made, particularly here in California, that we might see that will impact your business later on?
I'm also intrigued by the title of your book, Los Angeles Reinvented. What's it about? And also tell us about the 100+ executives you interviewed for the book.
Yeah, so one of the things that really fascinated me when I moved here is how everyone sees Silicon Valley as this mecca of innovation. And to be fair, it's earned its badge. You know, there's a lot of big companies that we've seen have fundamentally changed the world and are still fundamentally changing the world, as we're seeing with Facebook and Google right now. But actually, there's a lot of other hubs around the world as well. And when I came here to Los Angeles, I realized how much innovation is coming out of Los Angeles. And even a lot of people are moving from Silicon Valley to Los Angeles. So the subtitle of the book is Why Innovators Are Looking South of Silicon Valley to the Booming Home of Hollywood. Because actually what we've seen is a lot of those innovators are moving here. And I was very curious about that. So that's why I started interviewing people. And I think a couple of big examples are Travis Kalanick, who's well known for starting Uber. He's actually from LA. Now, when he started Uber, he went to Silicon Valley because that's where the VCs were. That's where the capital was, where the funding was. He was right to do so, started a huge business. He then, once he came out of that company, his next business, he started in Los Angeles. And now there is capital in Los Angeles. It's a great place to live. The sun shines every day. There's incredible talent here. There's incredible diversity. There's a lot of raw materials here. We've also got the biggest ports in the Western Hemisphere. So there's a lot of materials coming in. So with all these factors, I was just really interested to see, okay, well, how has this come about in LA as the one thing that's made it this real focus for innovation? Or is it a combination of factors? So I set about interviewing people, and I was lucky enough to speak to people like the CTO of Disney, right through to some local entrepreneurs and founders of businesses, and even a priest as part of this, which you'd have to read the book, but there's a really interesting story about a company called Homeboy Industries here. So it was fascinating going out and talking about that real breadth of industry here in Los Angeles.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. I'd be over straight away if it wasn't for lockdown. What do you think my viewers who are from all over the world, and especially the UK, can learn from your book? And how could they apply that learning?
So I think there's a few things here. First of all, I hope that it offers some inspiration. So the book is a series of stories about startups and businesses here and interesting things that are happening. Now, I've done it in a series of industries that LA is very prominent in. So it should also be as a resource. So, for example, if you're going out for dinner with someone who's in retail and you want to sound smart, at the end of each chapter, I've actually put the main bullet points of what's happening in retail. What are the things that are changing? So I hope it's inspirational, and that actually it's got a lot of information there about how businesses are changing and how that might then come over to other parts of the world. And of course, if you come to Los Angeles, it's a bit of a handbook.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. Yes, I totally agree with your concept that leaders need peripheral vision. I think too many get blindfolded from what's going on around them. I'm amazed that some of them know so little about what's going on, perhaps even in their own sector, never mind the world. How do you suggest such leaders throw off the blindfold?
Do you know what? It fascinates me, this. And it's one of the reasons that I wrote the book initially, because for our business, FORE MEDIA runs executive tours for those leaders, particularly in Europe, but also in other places. Now, we get a lot of phone calls and emails coming in saying, we want to go to Silicon Valley to look at innovation. Can you help? And just that question in itself fascinates me, because that's not the issue. Even with senior leaders, it's not that you want to go to Silicon Valley. The question here is, what's going to impact my business? What do I need in that peripheral vision, right? So I think there's a lot of, you don't have to come to Los Angeles. You don't have to have those face-to-face meetings. You can, by doing so, you get that real in-depth conversation. You can ask the questions you want to. And of course, you can build those relationships, and you can, everything we do is under Chatham House rules. So nothing is repeated outside, and we're very strict about that. And it allows people to have open-ended conversations. But actually, there's other ways you can do it. There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of great newsletters. There's a lot of great reporting and conferences. And as we're seeing now, virtual conferences and Zoom, there's a lot of people that you can hear speak that you'll learn a lot about, so that you can really make sure you've got that learning.
Brilliant. For some time, I've suggested that too many CEOs devote too little time at board meetings to forward thinking and innovation. They spend the majority of their time on historical facts and numbers. In other words, looking out of the back window of the car instead of looking out the front windscreen. Have you found this also?
Oh, 100%. And it's not going to change anytime soon, but that's the setup we've got. You know, if you look at the stock market, people are looking at quarterly results. People are looking to the next quarter, the next 6 months, the next year. And I'm not sure that a lot of business leaders are fundamentally really looking at their own business in 5 to 10 years. And a lot of them are not incentivized to look at their business in 5 or 10 years, because they're looking at their annual payouts. And if we're not incentivizing in the right way via the stock market, via salaries, via bonuses, then there's no reason for people to do that other than personal interest and growth. So I completely agree, but I think there needs to be some fundamental changes for that to really change.
Jodie, in my research for this interview, 2 words around FORE MEDIA jumped out for me, as they are 2 words I focus on myself for our own business. They are connect and collaborate. Take us through why you see these 2 words as key and how you go about helping businesses action them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think connecting with people is so important. You can sit in a basement, you can sit in your own place of work, and you are very much surrounded by your own environment and your internal, as you say, the numbers. But actually, by connecting with other people, you can always learn so much. You can learn from every single person you speak to. And I think that's really important, particularly for business leaders, because you need to know what's out there. You need to know what's coming at you, what's happening in the world. And you don't know where people can help you and where you can help them. And I fundamentally believe in collaboration. We all need to collaborate. no one goes through their career, no business is successful without some form of collaboration. So in Los Angeles, no one likes to burn bridges, but I also think it's very important that people really do have conversations. People are always looking for those opportunities. So talking to other people and making sure you're in touch with the right people and looking for those opportunities to collaborate, because you can get some great partnerships that you might not have thought about otherwise.
Yeah, brilliant. A third word that starting with C also jumped out to me, and it's one I'm quite passionate about in our own conscious business shows, as I feel it's helping change society, and that word is cultural, especially cultural values. Do you think businesses are starting to understand cultural values and their differences and actually take notice of them in their daily business activity?
Oh, cultural values are so important. And I think we're really seeing that. I mean, particularly in the US right now, there's been huge movements, as we've seen, to the very extreme of Black Lives Matter, because there is this systemic problem in the US. But I think all over the world, my background's newspapers. I know that you've got some interest in newspapers as well. Realistically, if you're a newspaper, how can you report on the society if your newsroom does not reflect the makeup of that society? And again, it's one of the things I find so interesting about Los Angeles. It's so diverse. 48% of Angelenos identify as Hispanic. And that may be that people are born here. It may be that they've moved here. It may be that their parents are Hispanic. But you've got such massive diversity here. And I think that's really recognized as being important. And although we've seen this kind of strange shift to nationalism over the last few years, generally we are in a global economy. We've got a lot of freedom of movement, as you say. You know this, you're zooming around the world all the time, talking to different people. The world's opening up, so we need to have more understanding of different cultures. We just do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Innovation, of course, is where you and your team are experts. I fear, though, that sometimes innovation is becoming an abused word because it's such a holy grail for businesses. What's your definition of true innovation?
It's so funny you say that, because I wholly agree. And I also think innovation has been hijacked by the technology industry. And actually, it's not just technology. It's a whole bunch of things. It can be something that's really simple. So actually, at the beginning of the book, I talk a lot about what innovation is not. And it's not just technology. It's not the makeup of your organization. It's a fundamental shift in how you change things and looking at new ways of doing things. So one of the examples I give is I get a lot of people come here, a lot of senior execs from around the world, and they see these big open plan offices and they think that is fantastic. And there's ping pong tables and there's ways in which people can collaborate. Fantastic, let's do that. And I think that kind of misses the point. I think the point is enabling people to collaborate. You're not suddenly going to be innovative because you change to an open plan office rather than individual offices. So it's making sure you really recognize, okay, well, what's the change we're trying to achieve?
The width and depth of business and the sheer volume of innovation projects must mean that you surely can't keep an eye on all of it. Is that why you've constructed a network of experts? If so, how does it work?
Absolutely. I mean, I know a little bit about a lot of things, enough to be dangerous. So my background's very much in media, as you know, so that's my personal area of expertise. But I work with a lot of venture capitalists here, incubators, experts. So depending on the industry, we will go to those experts with our client's issue or the problem they're trying to solve, or the questions. And we'll ask them to help us identify who we should be speaking to. And it's interesting for them. So we get a lot of openness to those conversations, because when people come over from Europe, from Australia, from Asia, our friends and our network here also learn a lot from having those companies visit. So it's actually a very welcome opportunity here. So we're just building up the network. And of course, the book helped. I interviewed over 100, I think it was about 130 executives in the end. And so we've built relationships with a lot of those people. So we know we don't say that we've necessarily got the answers, but what we do have is we have the framework and we have the network to go to the right people to help our clients answer those questions.
Let's go back to the book then, Los Angeles Reinvented, which, by the way, I think is such an intriguing title. I can't wait for the Hollywood film. It could be out before the next Bond, by the way we're going.
Yeah.
You have an obvious bias towards technology, where LA and the state has obviously led the way. But technology innovation is also happening in other parts of the world, such as here in the UK, not to mention Israel, Estonia, India, and others. Does LA have to look to its laurels with the rise of so many competitors, or do you believe it can continue to lead? And if so, why does the world need to beat that path to LA?
I agree. There's innovation happening all over the world, and that's part of this wonderful thing about the global communication that we have now. And great ideas and execution are not limited to a geographical location without a shadow of a doubt. So, but there are a few things that are really unique to Los Angeles, which is why I think a lot of companies end up here. First of all, the location. It feels far from Europe because it's on the West Coast, but we're near Silicon Valley. There's still a lot of capital up there. There's a lot of venture capital here in Los Angeles as well. There's a lot of that pure technology comes out of Silicon Valley, but also we're near Asia and we've got the biggest port in the Western Hemisphere. So there's a lot of raw materials coming in as well. So outside of technology, or even in terms of hardware, this is a great location to be. But more importantly, I think, and why we see a lot of people come here. And I say, a lot of the people I interview and a lot of the people I speak to are Israeli. Israeli are really known as the startup nation. But what happens is if you look at Israeli products, a lot of the time they're built in English and people move to the US. And the reason for that is that it's such a huge market. LA is one of the biggest consumer markets in the US itself. It's also hugely diverse, as I mentioned. So it's a great place to test products, because if you can make it work here, you can make it work anywhere. You can find those different groups and test products and services. And that's what I think makes LA particularly unique. Not to mention for us Europeans, particularly the Northern Europeans, the sun shines every day. We're near the beach. It's a wonderful place to be. There's a lot of great talent coming out of the universities here. So actually, lifestyle-wise, it's not a bad place.
You're just trying to upset me because it's cold here in Northumberland today. So, Jodie,
just trying to get you here, Malcolm.
Yeah, I know. Listen. Then, in response, an out-of-court question here. I, like you, have had a close relationship with the newspaper world. Myself, Thomson Newspapers in the UK. Yourself, many more, including Trinity Mirror. Now, many people think that digital media is sounding the death knell for physical newspapers. And yes, lots have closed. But do you think the industry will survive and we'll still be picking up a newspaper to read in, say, 10, 20, 30 years' time? Personally, I hope so. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think it will survive, because ultimately you need journalism to hold power to account. It's absolutely essential for democracy. And we're seeing that more than ever in the US. If you look even recently at Trump's tax returns, that was investigative journalism. It's important. It really is. And I think that's recognized. I think what we're seeing less is whether or not it's physical or digital. And again, the New York Times has done fantastically. When they brought in the paywall, and they weren't the first to bring in the paywall, but they were one of the first general interest newspapers to bring in a paywall. It was heavily criticized, but it was absolutely the right thing to do, because they need to pay for their journalism and it's recognized. So how people actually consume that, I think, is probably less important, whether it's online, whether it's on a laptop or a mobile, whether it's print, whether it's audio. Their daily podcast has done really well, whether it's video, but it's making sure you've got that quality journalism. And I actually spoke to the publisher of Condé Nast recently, and we were talking about this because obviously that's a fundamental part of their business as well. And actually, it's probably going to become a bit of a luxury product. It's expensive to print, but people still do enjoy it. I get the LA Times every weekend because I enjoy that physical product. The New York Times I mostly read online, just because I can't get through the whole thing over a weekend. So yes, I do think they're going to survive. Print will survive to some degree, but it might not be as widespread. And that's down to consumers. It's down to demand, ultimately.
I'll grad about that, because I love the sensual touch of the Sunday Times. It can last me all week. Okay, thanks for that. I know it was more of a personal interest question for me, but what the heck if I can't have one now and then. Let's get back to innovation. And can you get out Jodie's crystal ball? Can you give me 3 areas of innovations or change where you think my leaders and viewers should be looking at how change may impact their business in the future? In other words, 3 priorities to explore now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've already touched on a couple. I think the cultural aspect is really important. I think just recognizing how the world is changing is the most fundamental thing to goods and services right now. So it's making sure that you really understand the needs of customers. That is without a doubt the biggest area. And there's some really interesting companies that are helping with that. There's some great consultancies coming up that can really help, and some great data analytics that can really help people understand that. So without a doubt, cultural innovation. I think the other thing that we've all got to be really not wary about, but really aware of is data. It's whether it's customers' data or whether it's how people consume, but really making sure we've got some good numbers people in the organization is so important. You know, coming back to newspapers again and media, understanding, well, how do people get to my product or service? How do people get to this website? How do they come into an article? Are they referred by friends? Do they come in through social? Because by understanding that, you can understand how to grow. So I think that is hugely, hugely important. And the other thing I think, particularly out of this pandemic, and something like it's probably a personal thing that I hope will stick, is flexibility of work. And I don't know whether, again, this isn't a technical innovation, but I do think it's something that's fundamentally changing with people, is that we should be focusing on productivity rather than time in office. So I think that focus on people and your employees and making sure you get and retain the best talent, I think that's going to go hand in hand with the new world that we're living in, which is very much digital and allowing people to be in different places.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that last one there, because the work we've been doing on these interviews shows that CEOs are finding that greater productivity from those people working from home, but the CEOs are still reluctant to let go and to understand that they can't have people sitting in little desks all around. Jodie, I love to give my guests 3 wishes, and I want your 3 wishes to be around the connection between technology and consciousness or bettering society. What would your 3 wishes be?
Yeah, I think the first one, without a doubt, is to measure success by more than profits. And I mean that on a company level, and I mean it on a global level. So on a company level, we've already talked about that focus on profits over the next 3 months or the next year. I think we really need to look beyond that. And a lot of companies here, there's an organization, a nonprofit called Pledge LA, and that works with a lot of the venture capitalists and the startups here. And one of the things they're measuring is, how do you measure your organization? So they're looking at the companies, and there's a big move from just profits to what we call the 3 Ps: people, profits, and planet. And I think that is exceptionally important. And also for GDP, we all do this. We look at our countries purely by economics, and you look at the US even, and it's one of the wealthiest countries, yet right now, I think it's like 23% of children go to bed hungry because there's this mass unemployment and there's not a support system. And how can one of the richest countries in the world be measured purely by that success if they can't look after their children? I think that's a real shift that we need to see. So I'm happy with one. If that could be my wish, that would be it. Yeah. Then I think the other 2 are things that I've talked about a little bit. My wish would be that organizations really make sure that their organization reflects the audience. It's so important, particularly in media, but in every organization, you need to understand who you're selling to. And then the last one, again, is just something I just brought up, is measuring performance rather than time. We need to get more flexible. One of the big things in the pandemic is we've seen a lot of women who have had to give up jobs, scale back, because they are ultimately the main caretaker of children who are staying at home. That needs to change. And the only way that's going to change is if companies become more flexible with both male and female. And so I really hope that we start seeing that, and companies genuinely offer flexibility and look at productivity over time in the office or time at desk when we go back to those offices.
Jodie, there were three great wishes. And sadly, pantomime's not on in the UK this year. Otherwise, I'd go and see the fairy godmother so you can have them. Jodie Hopperton and FORE MEDIA, I have thoroughly enjoyed meeting you. Thank you for the interview.
Such a delight to talk to you. I really enjoyed it. I wish we could go on longer.